Looking back, it's funny how a life can pivot on a single thread. For me, it was a fine silk thread, the kind you use for invisible stitching on a wedding gown. For my mother, Beatrice, it was the thread she used to dangle me like a marionette my entire life, a thread she thought was unbreakable. She was wrong. The story of how I finally cut that thread isn't one I tell often, but when I do, I start with the silence. The beautiful, liberating silence that came after the storm, after the phones finally stopped ringing, after the world had picked its side. It was the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat for the first time in years. But before the quiet, there was the noise. So much noise. And it all started, as most family tragedies do, with a declaration of love. My name is Clara, and I am a wedding dress designer. That statement alone was a quiet rebellion. To my mother, designing dresses was a craft. A quaint little hobby, not a career. A career was what men like Alistair Worthington had. Alistair was the heir to the Worthington banking fortune, a man whose jawline was as sharp as his portfolio, and whose personality was just as flat. He was the man my mother had been grooming me to marry since I was 16. So you can imagine her reaction when I sat her down in her sterile white-on-white living room, a room so devoid of color and warmth. It felt like an art gallery for ghosts, and told her I was marrying Matthew, my Matthew, a high school history teacher, a man who could tell you about the fall of the Roman Empire but couldn't tell you the difference between Chanel and Chloe, a man who brought me wildflowers he picked on his morning run, whose hands were dusted with chalk instead of sanitized a dozen times an hour, who looked at me not like an asset to be acquired, but like a person to be cherished. He was kind, he was funny, and he was solidly, unapologetically middle class. In my mother's world, that was a sin worse than actual crime. I had braced myself for disappointment. What I got was a detonation. She just stared at me for a long moment, her perfectly manicured hand frozen halfway to her porcelain teacup. The air in the room grew thin and cold. Her smile, a carefully constructed piece of social architecture she wore at all times, didn't falter, but it became something sharp, something dangerous. "Clara, darling," she began, her voice a low, silky threat. "I think I misheard you. It sounded like you said you were throwing your entire future away." I took a deep breath. "I'm not, Mother. I'm in love with him. His name is Matthew, and we're getting married in June." She placed the teacup back on its saucer with a delicate, deliberate clink that echoed in the cavernous room like a gunshot. "A teacher," she said, the word dripping with a disdain she usually reserved for off-the-rack clothing. "You, Clara, with your breeding, your education, you are meant for more than a life of faculty meetings and bake sales." "I'm happy," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "Happiness is a fleeting emotion, Clara. Security is a legacy," she countered, leaning forward. "Alistair Worthington provides legacy. He provides a summer home in the Hamptons and a seat on the board of the museum. This teacher, what does he provide? A mortgage on a 3-bedroom house in a suburb with a name I can't be bothered to remember." The cruelty was so casual, so practiced. This was the moment I had been dreading. "His name is Matthew," I repeated, a little firmer this time. "And I don't want a seat on the board of the museum. I want a partner. I want a life I've built, not one I've married into." That was when the mask finally slipped. The polite smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure fury. "Built?" she spat. "You build things with needles and thread in that dusty little shop you call a studio. I built this family's name. I curated our social standing from nothing. I sacrificed. I networked. I smiled at women I despise. All to give you and your brother the best. And you repay me by embarrassing us, by choosing mediocrity." The word hung in the air between us, ugly and final. "If you marry that man," she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper, "you are no longer a part of this family. I will not be there. I will not watch you flush your potential down the drain. I will tell anyone who asks that you have made an unfortunate match and have chosen to distance yourself from those who love you." It was a declaration of war, an ultimatum designed to break me. She was leveraging my love for her, my fear of her disapproval, the very foundation of my upbringing, against my future happiness. She expected me to crumble, to apologize, to see the error of my ways, and come crawling back, ready to be fitted for the role of Mrs. Alistair Worthington. But something inside me, something that had been dormant for a very long time, finally clicked into place. I looked at her, at this woman who saw her own daughter as a chess piece in her relentless social game, and I felt not just hurt, but a profound clarifying anger. "Okay," I said, standing up, My legs felt surprisingly steady. I understand, she blinked, momentarily thrown. This was not in her script. You understand what, Clara? I understand that you won't be at my wedding, I said, my voice clear and even. Thank you for making your position clear. I'll make sure to leave your name off the seating chart. I walked out of that white room and didn't look back. The noise of her shouting my name followed me down the marble hallway, but for the first time it sounded distant, like a storm passing over someone else's house. The betrayal was absolute, a clean, deep cut. She hadn't just rejected my choice of a husband, she had rejected me, my work, my very definition of a happy life. And as I drove away from her perfect house, I made a promise to myself. I would have a beautiful wedding, I would have a beautiful marriage, and I would build a life so full of love and color that it would make her sterile white world look like the tomb it was. It wasn't about revenge. Not then anyway, it was about survival. The weeks that followed were a special kind of hell, a masterclass in psychological warfare conducted by my own mother. My phone, which had once been a source of connection, became a weapon aimed directly at my heart. The initial devastation was a physical thing. It felt like a constant low-grade fever, a hollowness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I'd be sketching a new design, the charcoal soft against the heavy paper, and the memory of her words, embarrassing us, mediocrity, would slam into me, and my hand would start to shake. I cried. I cried in the shower, the sound lost in the rush of water. I cried in my car, parked a block away from my studio, because I couldn't bear to face the day just yet. I cried one night in Matthew's arms, a raw, ugly sobbing that left me breathless and spent. He just held me, stroking my hair, not offering platitudes or easy fixes, just absorbing the shock of it all with me. I don't understand, I whispered into his shirt, the fabric damp with my tears. How can she be so cruel? He's a good person, Matt. You're a good person. How can that be an embarrassment? He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes, the color of warm honey, filled with a sadness that was entirely for my sake. Clara, this has nothing to do with me being a good person, he said gently, and it has nothing to do with you. This is about her. It's like she's a professional architect who only knows how to build skyscrapers, and you just told her you want to live in a beautiful cottage by the sea. She doesn't have the tools for that. She doesn't even understand the concept. To her, if it doesn't scrape the sky, it's a failure. His simple, perfect analogy cut through the fog of my grief. He was right. I was trying to get a woman who only valued height to appreciate depth. It was a fool's errand. His quiet strength was the anchor I clung to. He never once said a bad word about my mother. He just created a space so full of unwavering love and acceptance that her toxicity couldn't find a crack to seep through. But my mother was persistent. The pain wasn't just a memory, it was an ongoing assault, and every time I started to heal, she would rip the wound open again. This is when the flashbacks started coming, unbidden, ghosts of past humiliations, rising up to remind me that this wasn't a new behavior, just a final dramatic escalation of a lifelong pattern. I was 16 again, standing in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I had spent a month designing and sewing my own prom dress. It was made of midnight blue velvet, with tiny hand-stitched seed pearls forming constellations across the bodice. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever made. I felt like myself in it. I felt magical. Then my mother walked in. She circled me once, her lips pursed in that familiar, critical way. "What is this, Clara?" she asked, her tone making the question an accusation. "It's my prom dress," I said, my voice full of pride. "I made it. You made it," she repeated slowly, as if the concept were alien. "Darling, no, you look like you're going to a Renaissance fair. This is your junior prom at the country club, not a community theater production. The daughters of my friends will be in Vera Wang, in Oscar de la Renta. You cannot show up in homespun crafts." The word crafts landed like a slap. It was her favorite way to diminish my passion, to shrink it down into something quaint and amateurish. The next day, a box arrived from Saks. Inside was a beige, strapless dress. It was impeccably made, obscenely expensive, and utterly soulless. It erased every curve, every bit of personality. Wearing it, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I wore the beige dress, I smiled for the photos, and a part of me broke that night. I packed the midnight blue dress away in a box, and with it, a piece of my trust in her. Then came the memories of my brother, Julian. My charming, handsome, utterly useless brother. He was the golden child, the sun around which our family's little solar system revolved. Julian could do no wrong. When he got a C- on a major exam, it was because the teacher had it in for him. When I got a B+, it was a shame you couldn't have pushed for the A, Clara. The double standard was so blatant, so deeply ingrained in our family dynamic, that for years I didn't even question it. I just accepted it as the natural order of things. I remembered the day I got the letter, offering me a significant scholarship to Parsons. I was ecstatic. It was validation, a ticket to the future I dreamed of. I showed my mother, my finger tracing the prestigious letterhead. She glanced at it, a flicker of something. Was it pride? Annoyance? In her eyes before her placid mask slipped back on. "Oh, that's nice, darling," she said, her attention already drifting to the mail in her other hand. "A little hobby to keep you busy." That very evening, she and my father threw a lavish dinner party to celebrate Julian getting a junior marketing assistant role at a friend's firm, a job she had secured for him. As a gift, they bought him a brand new BMW. I sat at the dinner table, swirling the ridiculously expensive wine in my glass, feeling invisible. My life-changing achievement was a little hobby. His entry-level job warranted a $50,000 car. The financial disparity was a constant, gaping wound. Julian treated me like his personal ATM. It started small in college, $100 for books, $200 for a missed rent payment. It was always framed as a temporary crisis, and my mother would encourage it. "Just help your brother out, Clara. You're so responsible with your money." My responsibility was a resource to be tapped to cover for his lack of it. The final straw, before the engagement, had been the loan. After years of saving every penny, of working 2 jobs while I built my portfolio, I was finally ready to open my own studio. It was a small space, but it was perfect. I just needed a small business loan to cover the deposit and some initial equipment costs. I had a full business plan, projections, everything. I went to my parents first, not as a handout, but as a formal proposal. My father deferred to my mother, as he always did on matters of family investment. She reviewed my meticulously prepared folder with a dismissive air. "Clara, this is a lovely dream," she'd said, closing the folder and pushing it back across the table. "But it's a high-risk venture. The fashion world is fickle. We can't, in good conscience, invest in something so uncertain." I was crushed, but I understood. It was business. Or so I thought. 2 months later, I overheard a phone call. She was talking to my aunt, gushing. "Oh, Julian is so brilliant. He has this incredible idea for a boutique kombucha delivery service. We're giving him $75,000 to get it off the ground. He has such an entrepreneurial spirit." $75,000 for kombucha. The business folded in 6 months, and the money vanished without a trace. I never said a word. I went to a bank, used my own savings as collateral, and got the loan myself. I painted the walls, installed the lighting, and built my dream with my own 2 hands, fueled by lukewarm coffee and pure, unadulterated spite. These memories churned within me during the wedding planning. My mother, true to her word, began her campaign of sabotage. She called the caterer I'd booked, a wonderful woman who ran a farm-to-table business, and expressed concern about their ability to handle an event of our caliber, despite the fact that she wasn't even attending. She'd phone distant relatives and sigh about how she was so worried about Clara, planting seeds of doubt and pity. It was my best friend, Lena, who finally helped me turn the corner from hurt to resolve. Lena was a force of nature, a sharp, witty PR executive who could smell manipulation from a mile away. We were sitting in my studio, surrounded by bolts of silk and lace, and I was recounting the latest incident. "She's trying to ruin this for me," I said, my voice thick with frustration. Lena took a sip of her wine and looked at me, her gaze steady. "No, she's not. She's trying to win. This is a game to her, Clara. It has always been a game. She raised you to be her ambassador, her prize-winning porcelain doll. You were supposed to sit on the shelf until the right buyer, Alistair Worthington, came along. Instead, you climbed off the shelf, walked out the door, and decided to be a real person. She's not angry that you're happy. She's furious that you've ruined her display." Her words were a bucket of ice water. "It's not about love," Lena continued, leaning forward. "It's about control. You took away her favorite chess piece, and now she's trying to burn the whole board down." Something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, but it was crystallizing, hardening into something else, resolve, cold, clear, and unshakable. I looked around my studio. at the dress forms draped in my creations, at the sketches pinned to the walls, at the beautiful tangible evidence of the life I was building for myself, by myself. "She's not going to burn down my board," I said, my voice low. "She doesn't even get to play anymore." From that moment on, the plan wasn't to survive her attacks, it was to make them irrelevant. The secret plan, if you could call it that, was deceptively simple: to be so gloriously, incandescently happy and successful that her darkness couldn't touch my light. My wedding would not be a diminished version of what she wanted. It would be a vibrant celebration of everything she hated: authenticity, intimacy, and love, that wasn't measured by a bank statement. My revenge wouldn't be loud or confrontational. It would be the quiet, undeniable hum of a life well lived, a life she had no part in, and no power over. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself, clutching the thought like a shield. Not yet. But the foundation was being laid, stone by painful stone. The energy I had once wasted on trying to please my mother, I now poured into the two things that mattered: my relationship and my work. My studio became my sanctuary, and my wedding became my masterpiece. The secret plan was never a scheme plotted in a dark room, it was a strategy of radical joy, a deliberate turning away from the shadows and toward the sun. The most powerful act of defiance, I realized, was to simply build a better world for myself, one she couldn't enter. My own wedding dress became the physical manifestation of this resolve. It was everything my mother would have hated. It wasn't white, but a soft, antique ivory. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was intricate, with delicate, hand-embroidered vines climbing the bodice and spilling down the tulle skirt. Each vine was dotted with tiny, iridescent beads that caught the light, not in a gaudy flash, but in a subtle, magical shimmer. It was a dress that whispered, it didn't shout, it spoke of nature, of patience, of things that grow slowly and beautifully over time. It was the antithesis of her world of instant gratification and loud pronouncements of wealth. Working on it, late into the night, with only the hum of my sewing machine for company, felt like weaving a suit of armor. Each stitch was a reclamation of my own identity. My allies in this quiet rebellion were the bedrock on which I built my new life. Matthew was my co-conspirator in happiness. He saw the pain my family caused, but he never let it define our relationship. Instead, he drew the circle of our life, smaller and stronger. And then there was his family. Meeting them was like stepping into a different universe. His parents, David and Sarah, lived in a cozy, rambling house filled with books, mismatched mugs, and the constant delicious smell of whatever Sarah was baking. The first time I had dinner there, David, a retired carpenter, spent an hour showing me the wooden birdhouses he carved, his gnarled hands moving with surprising grace. Sarah, a librarian, hugged me the moment I walked in the door, a real, enveloping hug that felt more motherly than anything I'd ever received from Beatrice. They were fascinated by my work. They didn't call it a craft or a hobby, they called it artistry. Sarah would bring me old lace from her mother's collection, her eyes lighting up as she imagined how I might use it. David offered to build custom shelving for my studio. They loved me not for who I could connect them to, but for who I was. They loved Matthew for his kind heart and sharp mind, not his tax bracket. One evening, we were all in their backyard, stringing up fairy lights for the wedding reception, and I was laughing so hard at one of David's terrible jokes that I had to wipe tears from my eyes. It struck me with the force of a physical blow. This is what family is supposed to feel like. It's supposed to be a safe harbor, not a battlefield. This warmth, this unconditional acceptance, this was the real legacy. Lena, my other general in this war of attrition, played a different but equally crucial role. She was my strategic arm. You can't let her control the narrative, Clara, she told me over coffee one morning. Right now, the only story being told is hers, whispered over cocktails at the club. We need to create your own. She helped me set up a professional Instagram account for my design studio, Clara Astor, using my middle name as my brand. She art-directed a photo shoot, capturing my gowns in the soft ethereal light of my studio. The photos were stunning. They weren't just pictures of dresses, they were pictures of a dream. Lena then used her PR magic to get me featured on a few small but highly respected bridal blogs. The kind read by industry insiders, not the masses. The features were unpaid, focused entirely on the quality and unique vision of my work. It was a small, quiet ripple, but it was a start. It was my story, told in my own language. The hidden leverage in all of this, the power source my mother was completely blind to, was my talent. She had spent my entire life devaluing it, dismissing it, and in doing so she had rendered herself incapable of ever seeing it as a threat. To her, power was money, connections, and status. The idea that power could come from a needle and thread was as foreign to her as a budget airline. I was a seamstress in her eyes, a quaint throwback. She couldn't comprehend that in the right hands, a needle could be mightier than a platinum credit card. The first test of my new resolve came not from my mother, but from my brother. Julian called me about a month before the wedding. The whining started immediately. "Clara, I'm in a real jam," he began, his voice oozing a practiced, boyish charm that had long since worn thin on me. "My car insurance is due, and I'm a little short. Mom's not being very helpful right now. You know how she gets." I knew exactly how she gets. She was likely punishing him as a way to punish me, a classic move from her playbook. In the past, I would have sighed and transferred the money, just to keep the peace, to stop the endless circular arguments. But something had changed in me. I pictured myself in Matthew's parents' backyard, under the fairy lights, feeling genuinely happy. I thought of the long hours I was working, not just to build my business, but to pay for a wedding my own family was actively trying to sabotage. The well of my sympathy for Julian had finally run dry. "I can't help you, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean you can't?" he stammered. "You always do. Things are different now," I said simply. "I have my own expenses, a wedding, a business to run. I'm not in a position to cover for you anymore." "Not in a position?" he scoffed, his voice turning petulant. "You live in that studio. What expenses could you possibly have? Come on, Clara, don't be like this. It's only $500. Only $500 had been the refrain of my 20s. It was never only $500. It was the constant expectation, the lack of gratitude, the assumption that my hard work existed to cushion his irresponsibility. "The answer is no, Julian," I said, and the finality in my own voice surprised me. "I'm sorry you're in a jam, but you'll have to figure it out yourself." I could hear him sputtering, launching into a guilt trip about family and loyalty, but I just said, "I have to go, I have a client coming," and I hung up. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't from fear or guilt. It was from adrenaline. I had said no. I had held the line. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. I knew he would go straight to our mother, and I knew her fury would be stoked even higher, but I didn't care. I was no longer putting out the fires they started. I was too busy tending to my own garden, and it was, against all odds, beginning to bloom. The morning of my wedding arrived, a perfect, sun-drenched day in early June. I woke up not in a fancy hotel suite, but in my own apartment, the one Matthew and I would share. I felt a strange and wonderful sense of peace. The storm of my mother's creation had raged for months, but on this day it felt like it was happening a world away. There was a pang of sadness, a ghost of the daughter who wished her mother was there, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of liberation. Today I was marrying the man I loved. Today I was celebrating the life I had chosen. Today was mine. I decided to get ready at my studio. It felt right. It was the place where I had forged my independence, my sanctuary. Lena was there, along with Matthew's sister, Chloe. They were bustling around, a whirlwind of champagne, hairspray, and joyful energy. My dress, my beautiful, intricate dress, was hanging on a custom form in the center of the room, glowing in the morning light. I was just stepping out of the makeup chair when the bell on the studio door chimed violently. We all froze. It was too early for guests. My first thought, a cold spike of dread, was that it was my mother, here for a last-ditch dramatic confrontation. But it wasn't my mother. The woman who burst through the door was a vision of expensive, unraveling panic. She was tall and impossibly chic, even with mascara running down her face. Her blonde hair was escaping from a sophisticated chignon, and she was clutching the front of a silk dressing gown like a lifeline. Behind her, a flustered assistant was babbling into a phone. I recognized her instantly from the society pages my mother used to leave open on the coffee table. It was Serafina Vance, the shipping heiress, the fiancée of one Alistair Worthington. "Please," she gasped, her eyes wide and frantic, scanning the room. "Please tell me you make wedding dresses. My assistant saw you on some blog. She said you were a genius. Please, you have to help me." Lena stepped forward, ever the professional. "What seems to be the problem?" Serafina's composure finally shattered. A sob escaped her. "My dress," she choked out, gesturing wildly. It's ruined. It was flown in from Paris this morning, and a case of wine, a gift it broke in the luggage hold. It's covered in Chateau Margaux. It looks like a prop from a horror movie. I'm getting married in 3 hours. My own wedding was in 4. A surreal silence fell over the studio. Chloe's jaw was on the floor. Lena looked at me, her expression a mixture of shock and something else, something calculating. Here, on the morning of my wedding, was the fiancé of the very man I was supposed to have married. Her own designer dream turned into a nightmare. The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a pair of sewing shears. My first instinct was self-preservation. This was my day. I had fought tooth and nail for this peace, this joy. I couldn't sacrifice it for her. What was I supposed to do? It was an impossible situation. But then I looked at her, really looked at her. Underneath the panic and the privilege, I saw a bride, a woman on the verge of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, watching it crumble into chaos. I saw the same desperation I had felt so many times, the feeling of being trapped in a narrative you didn't write. She was another victim of this high-pressure world, where a dress isn't just a dress but a statement, a symbol, a weight. And in that moment, she wasn't Alistair Worthington's fiancée. She was just a woman whose heart was breaking on her wedding day. It was a debatable choice, I know. My own wedding was hanging in the balance. My friends would have understood if I'd said no. Matthew would have understood. But something in me, the part that had been told my work was just a craft, the part that had been dismissed and devalued, rose to the surface. It wasn't about her. It was about the work. It was about what I could do. I have a dress, I heard myself say, the words coming out before I had even fully processed them. It's a sample, it might fit, but we have to work fast. Serafina's head snapped up, her tear-filled blue eyes locking onto mine. Hope, fragile and desperate, dawned on her face. Anything, she whispered. I'll do anything. The next hour was a blur of focused, high-stakes intensity. The dress I pulled out wasn't my own wedding gown, that was safely packed and ready to go, but it was its sister, a design I had labored over for a showcase, a testament to my skill. It was a column of ivory crepe with a detachable overskirt of gossamer silk, embroidered with delicate silver-threaded blossoms. We got her into the dress. It was close, a little too long, a little loose in the waist. Serafina stood on the pedestal, staring at her reflection, her breath catching in her throat. "Oh," she breathed. It was a sound of pure reverence. "Don't move," I commanded, already on my knees, my mouth full of pins. The atmosphere in the studio had transformed. It was no longer a bridal suite, it was an operating theater. Lena and Chloe became my nurses, handing me needles, thread, scissors. I worked with a speed and precision I didn't know I possessed. I wasn't thinking, I was just doing. My hands knew this language. The snip of the shears, the pull of the thread, it was as natural to me as breathing. I hemmed the crepe, tacked the overskirt, and cinched the waist with a series of hidden internal stitches, creating a flawless silhouette. The entire time, Serafina was completely still, watching me in the mirror. Her panic had subsided, replaced by a quiet awe. When I finally stood up, brushing a stray thread from her shoulder, she looked transformed. The dress didn't just fit her, it seemed to belong to her. It was elegant, powerful, and utterly unique. It was 1,000 times more interesting than the generic, poofy creations favored by her social set. "It's better," she whispered, turning slowly, her hand tracing the silver embroidery. "It's better than the one from Paris." She met my eyes in the mirror, and what I saw there was not the gratitude of a client, but the deep respect of an equal. "Who are you?" I managed a small, wry smile. "My name is Clara Astor, and I'm a designer." Her assistant, who had been frantically making calls, reappeared. "The payment has been transferred," she said to me, then turned to her boss. "Serafina, we have to go, now." Serafina nodded, but didn't take her eyes off me. "The amount I sent is triple your asking price for the sample," she said, her voice firm. "It's not enough. You saved me. What's your story?" I glanced at the clock on the wall. I had exactly 55 minutes to get to my own wedding. "It's a long one," I said, "but today it gets a new chapter, and so does yours. Now go get married." She gave me one last look, a look that sealed a strange and unspoken alliance between us. Then she was gone, a whirlwind of ivory crepe and renewed hope. leaving behind a stunned silence and the faint, lingering scent of expensive perfume and triumph. I stood there for a second, my heart hammering in my chest, and then I started to laugh. Today was definitely going to be a day to remember. That moment of shared frantic creation in my studio was the final emotional exodus. It was as if by saving Serafina's wedding, I had fully and finally saved myself. All the lingering ghosts of my mother's expectations, of Alistair Worthington, of a life I was supposed to have, were exorcised in that hour of intense creative focus. I wasn't the jilted, lesser choice anymore. I was the artist, the savior, the one with the power to turn a disaster into a miracle. I had my own wedding to get to, and I walked towards it, feeling lighter than I had in my entire life. Our wedding was everything my mother's world was not. It took place not in a cavernous, imposing cathedral, but in the sun-dappled conservatory of a local botanical garden. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming jasmine. We had only 50 guests, real friends, beloved family, Matthew's family. There were no strangers there to impress, no social debts being paid. Every single person in that room loved us. When I walked down the aisle on the arm of Matthew's father, David, I saw Matthew waiting for me, and his face was a portrait of such pure, unadulterated joy that it took my breath away. He wasn't looking at my dress, he was looking at me. In that moment, the rest of the world, with all its noise and judgment, simply fell away. During the ceremony, I didn't think about my mother once. I didn't think about her empty seat or the cruel words she'd flung at me. My mind was beautifully, blissfully empty of her. The power shift wasn't a future event I was plotting. It was happening right then and there, in the quiet space where I chose my own happiness over her approval. The reception in David and Sarah's backyard was a joyful, chaotic, beautiful affair. We danced on the slightly uneven grass, under the fairy lights we'd strung ourselves. We ate delicious food, served from mismatched platters. We drank cheap, wonderful champagne, out of plastic flutes, and toasted to a future we would build together. It was real, it was messy, and it was perfect. This was my world now. I was home. The week after the wedding was a blissful honeymoon bubble. Even though we were just at home, we slept late, ate takeout on the floor of our living room, and talked for hours. And then, on Thursday, the two narratives that had been running on parallel tracks finally collided. It started with my mother's society column. My aunt, my mother's sister, and a quiet sympathizer in my corner, sent me a picture of it with the text, "Brace yourself." Beatrice hadn't named me, of course. She was too clever for that, but the subject was unmistakable. The column was titled, "On Letting Go," and it was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive martyrdom. She wrote of the private grief a parent feels when a child chooses a path so profoundly beneath them. She lamented the trend of forsaking legacy for fleeting infatuation, and ended with a sighing, pitying line about how sometimes all a mother can do is pray her daughter one day understands the world she has thrown away. It was designed to wound, to paint me as a foolish girl, and her as a long-suffering saint. A few years ago, it would have leveled me, but reading it now, sitting on the floor next to my husband, I just felt a distant, clinical pity for her. Her world was so small, her weapons so petty. And then Lena called. She didn't say hello, she just screamed, "Oh my God, have you seen it?" "Seen what?" "My mother's sad little diary entry?" I asked, laughing. "No," Lena said, her voice practically vibrating with glee. "Vogue, the digital edition just dropped. You need to open it, right now." My heart started to pound. I grabbed my laptop, my hands shaking slightly. I typed in the address, and there it was, the lead story on the front page of the style section. The headline was massive, bold, and electrifying. Iris Serafina Vance's wedding day disaster, saved by brilliant unknown designer. Beneath the headline was a breathtaking photograph of Serafina. She was standing on the steps of a grand estate, looking radiant, powerful, and serene. And she was wearing my dress. The article, written by a top fashion journalist, recounted the entire dramatic story of the wine-soaked Parisian gown and the last-minute rescue. It described my studio as a hidden gem of authentic artistry. It called my design a triumph of modern elegance and quiet confidence. But the killer blows were the direct quotes from Serafina herself. "The dress I ended up wearing was more me than the one that was ruined," she was quoted as saying. "It was like it was made for me. It had a soul." And then came the final perfect line. In a world of brand names, I was saved by pure, unadulterated talent. Her name is Clara Astor, and she is a visionary. The article included a link to my professional Instagram account. I just stared at the screen, my mind reeling. The two articles, my mother's and Vogue's, had been published on the same day. My mother's column, lamenting my unfortunate match and my choice to embrace a world of mediocrity. And Vogue, the absolute Bible of her universe, celebrating that mediocrity as visionary talent and holding me up as the hero of a high society fairy tale. My phone started to buzz. Then it started to ring. Then it started to do both. A frantic, non-stop chorus of notifications. Lena was right. This was a power shift. But it wasn't a shift. It was an earthquake. And the ground under my mother's feet was about to crumble into dust. The vindication was not a slow burn. It was a flash fire. My world, which for so long had been small and quiet, suddenly exploded. The first calls were from journalists, fashion bloggers, local news channels, even a producer from a morning talk show. They all wanted to talk to the brilliant unknown designer. My Instagram account, which had a humble few hundred followers, was rocketing into the thousands, then tens of thousands. Every notification was a small chime of victory. Then came the calls from my mother's world. The first was from a woman named Eleanor, one of my mother's closest friends and biggest rivals. Her tone was a syrupy mix of feigned delight and sharp-edged curiosity. "Clara, darling, we just saw the piece in Vogue. How absolutely marvelous. Your mother must be bursting with pride. It's so funny, she never mentioned you were so involved with Serafina Vance's wedding. She must have wanted to keep it a secret, the clever thing." I could hear the unspoken questions, the delicious gossip being gathered. I gave her nothing. "It was all very last minute," I said politely. "You'll have to ask my mother about her column. I haven't had a chance to read it. The dam had broken. The story was too perfect. The juxtaposition too stark. A mother publicly pitying her daughter for her poor choices on the exact same day that Vogue crowns her a fashion savior. It was the kind of schadenfreude that the society pages live for. My mother hadn't just been proven wrong. She had been made to look like a fool, a jealous, out-of-touch snob who couldn't even recognize the visionary talent living under her own roof. Finally, after a day of this escalating chaos, the call I was waiting for came. The caller ID simply read, "Mother." I took a deep breath, looked at Matthew, who gave me a supportive nod, and answered. I was expecting screaming. What I got was a low, guttural rage that was far more terrifying. "What did you do?" she hissed. There was no preamble, no hello. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, my voice perfectly calm. The calmness was a revelation to me. I wasn't scared of her anymore. "Don't play games with me, Clara," she spat. "This Vogue article, this public humiliation. You planned this. You colluded with that Vance girl to make a mockery of me. After everything I have done for you, after I built a name for you to carry, you spit on it and then you drag it through the mud." I almost laughed, the sheer breathtaking narcissism of it. In her mind, Serafina Vance's wedding, my career, all of it, was about her. "Mother," I said, and the word felt foreign in my mouth. "Let me see if I understand. You wrote a public column calling my marriage a tragedy and my life a disappointment. Vogue wrote a public article calling my work a triumph. How exactly is their version of events my fault? You embarrassed the family," she shrieked, her voice finally cracking. "No," I said, and the finality in my voice was absolute. "You did. Your column embarrassed you. Your bitterness embarrassed you. Your snobbery embarrassed you. All I did was my job. All I did was get married. The world can see both stories now, and it can decide which one it prefers." There was a choked sound on the other end, a noise of pure, impotent fury. "You have ruined me," she whispered. "No," I said again, the word feeling more powerful each time I said it. "You have ruined yourself. Goodbye, Mother." I hung up the phone. I blocked her number. I felt nothing but a vast, empty relief. The new reality settled in with astonishing speed. The fallout for Beatrice was swift and total. Her society column was indefinitely suspended by the magazine, citing an obvious and embarrassing conflict of interest. Her social circle, a fragile ecosystem built on appearances and the avoidance of ridicule, froze her out. She wasn't a powerful queen bee anymore. She was a punchline. The woman who couldn't spot a star in her own daughter. A few days later, my brother Julian called. He was frantic. "Clara, you have to fix this. Mom is going insane. She's cut me off. She said I'm a disappointment just like you, but at least you're a rich disappointment now. You have to talk to her, smooth things over. The plea was so pathetic, so typical. He didn't care about me, or about what our mother had done. He just cared that the family ATM had run dry. I'm not the family's bank or its janitor anymore, Julian, I said, the words I had practiced in my head for years finally being said out loud. I can't fix this. This is a mess you all made. You're on your own. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, Matthew and I were sitting on our small balcony, looking through travel brochures. We were finally planning a real honeymoon. My phone buzzed with an email. It was from a major luxury department store, asking for a meeting to discuss an exclusive bridal collection. I showed it to Matthew, and he just grinned, wrapping his arm around me. The air was cool, the city lights twinkled below, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly free. The war was over. I had won, not by fighting, but by simply building something beautiful in a different place. Months have passed since that whirlwind week. My life today is almost unrecognizable, yet it's more authentically mine than it has ever been. My little studio is gone, replaced by a spacious, light-filled atelier in the heart of the city's fashion district. I have a small team now, talented young designers who share my vision. The Clara Astor brand is no longer an unknown entity, it's a name synonymous with bespoke elegance and modern romance. We have a wait list that's over a year long, and the pressure is immense, but it's a good kind of pressure. It's the pressure of success, of demand, of having created something the world actually wants. It's the kind of pressure that energizes you instead of draining you. Matthew and I took that honeymoon. We went to Italy, and we ate pasta and drank wine, and got lost in ancient cobblestone streets. He is still a history teacher. He still comes home with chalk dust on his trousers, and he still brings me wildflowers. Nothing about him has changed, and that's why everything works. He grounds me. He reminds me of what is real and what is noise. Our love isn't a headline, it's the quiet, steady rhythm of our everyday life, and it is the most valuable thing I will ever own. I hear things about my mother, of course, whispers through the family grapevine. My aunt tells me Beatrice sold the big white house. It was too expensive to maintain without the social standing, and the husband that came with it. My father, it turned out, finally grew tired of being a silent accessory to her ambition, and left her shortly after she lost her column. She lives in a condo now, somewhere smaller, somewhere quieter. The society that was once her entire world has forgotten her. She is irrelevant, and for a woman like my mother, irrelevance is a fate worse than death. Julian, from what I hear, had to get a real job. The bank of mom and dad is permanently closed. It wasn't about the revenge, I tell myself sometimes, but I can't deny that the quiet satisfaction of that karmic justice is sweet. It's the universe balancing its books. You know, for years, I honestly believed that my mother's approval was the most important thing in the world. I thought her definition of success, the right connections, the right name, the right bank account, was the only one that mattered. I spent so much of my life contorting myself to try and fit into the narrow, suffocating box she had built for me. I was so desperate for a single crumb of validation from her that I almost starved my own soul. What I learned on my wedding day, in that frantic, beautiful hour of saving someone else's dream, was that true value isn't something another person can give you. It's not an inheritance or a title, it's something you build yourself, with your own two hands. My mother wanted me to marry into a world of glittering empty surfaces, but I found my fortune in the strength of my own fingers, in the vision in my own mind, and in the love of a good man who cherished the person I was, not the person I could be traded for. She thought I was throwing my life away by choosing a middle-class teacher, but he and the life we have built ended up being the greatest luxury of all. Have you ever had to deal with a family member who just couldn't see your worth, no matter what you did? Someone who had their own script for your life and got angry when you started to improvise? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read them all, and I know so many of us have faced that struggle. And if you found some strength or satisfaction in my story, please give this video a like and subscribe for more, because sometimes the best revenge is simply writing your own happy ending.